The unexpected war. The desert sky of Keller 7 was always red, like it was forever on fire. Wind howled across the broken plains, carrying dust and the smell of fear. The war had ended, or so they thought. Captain Raylan Burke, the last human standing on this side of the galaxy, stepped off the wrecked shuttle with a bruised arm and a cracked visor. His ship was shot down 2 hours ago. He should have been dead. Instead, he stood there, squinting at a planet that hated life. Behind a nearby ridge, something moved, slow, heavy, and deliberate. "They're coming," a soft voice said behind him. He turned fast. An alien girl stood a few meters away, her silver armor scratched, her violet skin dusty, her long white hair tied back. She looked young, maybe in her 20s by human guess, but her eyes were old. She was a Virelin, proud, elegant, cold, and very clearly annoyed. "You shouldn't be alive," she added, folding her arms. "Nice to meet you too," Raylan muttered, brushing sand off his pants. "I saw your ship crash. That model doesn't survive Keller's skies. You're either lucky or cursed." He didn't answer. He looked toward the noise again. The ground trembled, just a little. She followed his gaze and smirked. "Oh, you haven't met the Kaldrak yet, have you?" "What's that?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pointed toward the ridge. A shadow moved, then another. Huge, too big, 4 legs, maybe 6. Hard to tell through the dust. "You'll see," she said, almost laughing. Raylan didn't like her tone. It was the kind of laugh soldiers made before someone died. "Wait," he said, stepping closer. "What's going on here?" "I was told this zone was cleared. The Virelin Council said the war's over." The girl didn't look at him. War is never over. It just hides. He took a deep breath. "So what now?" She finally looked at him again, raising an eyebrow. "You stay behind me. Try not to scream." Raylan blinked. "Excuse me?" Before she could answer, a roar split the air, deep and guttural. The sand shook beneath their feet. Then it appeared. It was massive, taller than a dropship, covered in jagged bone-like armor. Its head had 2 glowing eyes and a mouth full of blades. The Kaldrak. Raylan instinctively reached for his blaster, but the girl laughed again. "That won't help. Nothing kills a Kaldrak. Best we run." But Raylan didn't move. He stared at the beast, watching how it moved. It wasn't mindless. It was tracking, studying, like a predator, but one with thought. She noticed his stillness. Her smile faltered slightly. "You do know what that is, right?" "I know it's alive," he whispered, "and alive things can be tamed." She actually laughed this time, a cruel, mocking sound. "You're human, all right," she said, "always thinking you can bend the universe to your will. You'll be dead in seconds." Raylan didn't answer. He stepped forward. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "It'll rip you apart." But he kept walking. Slowly, carefully. No sudden moves. No weapons drawn. The Kaldrak growled. Its huge head tilted. It was confused. Raylan knelt in the sand. Not to bow, not to submit, but to meet it at eye level. The alien girl stared in disbelief. "You're insane," she whispered. The Kaldrak roared again, louder this time, but Raylan didn't flinch. He reached into his pack. Slowly, the girl raised her blaster. "If it charges, I'll shoot." "Don't," Raylan said calmly. I understand." He pulled out a small metallic device, a sonic emitter, old tech, but useful. He turned it on and placed it in the sand. The Kaldrak stepped closer, curious. Raylan didn't move. His heart was pounding, but he stayed calm. Slow breathing, no fear. The girl couldn't believe what she was seeing. The beast lowered its head. It sniffed the air. Then, with a huff, it sat, right in front of him, obedient, calm. Raylan stood slowly, eye to eye with the monster. She didn't laugh this time. Her smile faded. The beast's test. The Kaldrak sat like a silent mountain in front of Raylan. Its breath was heavy, like steam escaping a broken engine. The alien girl, Varela, still stood frozen, her blaster half raised, eyes wide. "You tamed it," she whispered, almost not believing her own words. Raylan didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on the beast. Every movement mattered. One wrong step, and he'd be inside that creature's stomach. "I didn't tame it," Raylan said quietly. "I asked it to listen." "That's different." The Kaldrak's huge yellow eyes blinked slowly. It let out a deep grunt and lowered its head again. "Beasts don't listen," Varela muttered. "They only follow power or fear." Raylan finally turned to her, still calm. Then maybe it felt something new. She didn't reply. Instead, she looked around nervously. Others are watching. Kaldraks don't move alone. They test before they kill. Raylan looked back at the beast. It was staring past him now, toward the far ridge. And then he felt it. The ground shook again. Not once, but 3 times. Rhythmic. Heavy. More were coming. "Great," Raylan whispered. "Family reunion." Varela walked up beside him. "This wasn't a good idea, human. You've impressed one. But the others, they won't be so easy." Raylan looked at her, then at the approaching shadows. "I don't need easy," he said. "I need a chance." As the second Kaldrak appeared, Raylan could feel its anger in the air. This one was bigger, older. Its armor was cracked from old battles, and one of its eyes glowed a darker orange. It roared at the first Kaldrak, a deep, commanding sound. The one sitting in front of Raylan stood and backed away slowly. It didn't want to fight. Not now. Raylan stepped between them. "What are you doing?" Varela hissed. "That one's a prime. It leads." "Exactly," Raylan said. The prime Kaldrak charged. Varela shouted, "Move, you idiot." But Raylan didn't move. He raised his hands, palms open. He waited, and just before the beast reached him, he shouted a single word. "Stop." The Kaldrak skidded in the sand, claws tearing into the ground. Its face was inches from Raylan. Hot breath blasted into his face. Varela had already raised her weapon again, but Raylan held up a hand to stop her. "No," he said. "Let me try." The prime stared at him. Its eyes glowed. Its chest moved like a machine, gears grinding inside. Raylan reached up, slowly, and touched its snout. Silence. The wind dropped. The air held still. Varela stared, her mouth open. The prime didn't attack. It growled, low and steady, then turned, and walked away. The first Kaldrak followed. Raylan stood there, not moving, for several seconds. Then he finally let out a breath. That, he said, was too close. Varela walked up beside him again. Her voice was quiet now. How did you do that?" "No one controls a prime. Not even our warriors." Raylan looked up at the sky, then at her. "I didn't control it. I respected it. Beasts know the difference between fear and understanding." She stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "You're not like other humans," she said. "I get that a lot." They started walking across the plain. The sun was beginning to lower, but on Kettler 7, that didn't mean safety. Shadows brought worse things. Raylan checked his scanner. It was almost out of power. "We need shelter," he said. "There's an old ruin east of here," Varela replied. "My team used it before the crash. If they're still alive, they'll be waiting." "Let's hope so." But just as they started heading toward it, a distant scream echoed across the rocks. Not human. Not alien. Another roar followed. Raylan and Varela both stopped. The Kaldraks were returning. But this time, they weren't curious. They were angry. And something else, something worse, was chasing them. Virella grabbed his arm. Run. Raylan didn't ask questions. He ran beside her, the wind sharp against his face. Behind them, the beasts roared, but not at the humans. They were afraid. Raylan looked over his shoulder, and his stomach dropped. In the sky, wings spread across the blood-red clouds. A flying creature, darker than night, screeched as it dove toward the ground. Virella's voice cracked. That's not a Kaldrak. Raylan's heart pounded. Then what is it? She looked at him, her voice shaking. It's the reason this planet was abandoned. The ruins and the truth. They ran hard. Dust whipped their faces, and the sound behind them grew louder. Wings slicing the air, monstrous cries echoing over the rocks. Raylan had never heard anything like it before. Even in all the battles he'd fought, nothing had sounded this alive, and this angry. Virella didn't speak as they ran. She just led him, fast and focused, through a broken path of stones. Every few seconds, she glanced up at the sky, eyes sharp and full of fear. Raylan followed her steps. The land changed fast. Jagged rocks gave way to cracked roads, then to shattered stone pillars rising from the sand like broken fingers. Where are we? Raylan called out between breaths. She didn't answer at first. Then, as they passed under a half-fallen arch covered in alien symbols, she finally said, "The old temple city. Before the war, it was sacred." Sacred to who? She glanced at him. To the Kaldraks. Raylan stopped in his tracks. Wait, they worshipped something. They still do, Virella said, pulling him forward. You'll see. A shadow passed over them. The creature above was circling now, huge and graceful, and death itself. Raylan couldn't get a clear look, but he saw the shape, long wings, black scales, and 6 legs, like a dragon out of Earth's myths, but twisted. They ducked into a broken structure. Inside, the air was cooler, still heavy with dust, but safe from the sky. At least for now. Raylan leaned against a cracked wall, catching his breath. The room looked ancient. Carvings filled the stone. Giant beasts, tall warriors, glowing stars, and something else. A figure with no face. What is this place? He asked, his voice quiet. Virella walked slowly through the shadows. Her hand touched one of the carvings. This was the Hall of First Contact, she said. Our ancestors believe this is where the Kaldraks met something from the sky. Something that taught them. Something that changed them. Raylan studied the figure on the wall. It had long arms and strange markings all over its body. Its eyes were circles with stars in them. This isn't human, he said. No. Older, Virella replied. And powerful. The Kaldraks obey it, or fear it. Maybe both. Raylan looked around. The carvings told a story. The Kaldraks weren't just beasts. They were part of something bigger, a cycle, a system, maybe even a religion. Why didn't anyone tell us? He asked. The war, everything. We were fighting animals. Virella shook her head. Because we thought they were animals. But they aren't. They remember. They feel. And that thing chasing us, that's their god. Raylan frowned. You believe that? I don't have to. Look around. She pointed toward a broken altar. See the blood? That's fresh. Raylan walked over and saw it. Dark red stains on the stone. Not dry. Not old. They still come here, he whispered. They still worship. Suddenly, a loud boom hit the temple from above. Dust rained down. Then another boom. And another. Virella's eyes widened. It found us. Raylan turned to her. What is it? What does it want? She stepped back, slowly, like remembering something she had tried to forget. They called it Syraxis, the Sky Eater. It's not just a beast. It tests leaders. It destroys the weak. And it's waking up the Kaldraks. Calling them. Calling them for what? To follow a new ruler. Raylan went still. A ruler. She nodded. Every few generations, Syraxis chooses one. Not just any Kaldrak. Anyone. It tests them. If they pass, the Kaldraks follow. If not, she didn't finish. Raylan looked up at the ceiling. He remembered the Kaldrak's behavior, how they watched him, how they stopped fighting. They think it's me. Virella didn't speak. She just looked at him, no longer smirking, no longer annoyed, afraid. The roof cracked. A huge claw punched through the stone. Dust exploded into the room. Raylan grabbed her arm. We need to move. They ran through a side tunnel just as the ceiling collapsed behind them. The screech of Syraxis shook the walls. They burst into another chamber, this one darker, colder. In the center stood a massive circular platform. Stone rings surrounded it, floating in midair. What is this? Raylan asked. Virella stepped forward. The trial platform. Trial for what? She looked at him. For the one Syraxis chooses. Raylan stared at the platform, and then the ground trembled again. The trial had begun. The trial begins. Raylan stood at the edge of the platform, staring into the floating stone rings. They moved slowly around the center like ancient machines powered by air and memory. The ground buzzed beneath his feet, as if the very planet was watching. Above them, the cries of Syraxis echoed. It wasn't just a beast. It was circling like a judge waiting for a verdict. Virella didn't speak. She stood to the side, her face pale, her hands clenched tight. This platform, Raylan said, what does it want from me? She looked at him carefully. It wants to see who you are when everything is stripped away. Strength? No, she said. Truth. Before Raylan could answer, the center of the platform lit up. A beam of red light shot upward, and the stone rings stopped spinning. Then, with a low hum, the ground under Raylan dropped, only slightly, but enough to trap him in place. He was inside the circle. From the shadows above, Syraxis roared. What's happening? He shouted. The trial, Virella said. It's starting. The rings around him glowed. One by one, they floated higher and began to form shapes, holograms, images, pieces of something larger. Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of him. Not real, not physical, but almost familiar. It was a man. Know him. A copy of himself. The duplicate Raylan stepped forward. Its voice sounded like his, but colder. You think courage is enough, the voice said. But what happens when fear comes? What happens when the beast inside you is worse than the one in front? Raylan stared. This is the test. The copy charged him. Raylan ducked. The blow missed, but just barely. The rings flashed again, and the ground shifted. Now the arena was larger, hotter. It looked like a battlefield. Burning skies, dead bodies, ruined metal. His old memories. He turned and saw Virella outside the platform. She was watching, but she couldn't enter. This was his alone. The copy attacked again. Raylan blocked it, then tackled it to the ground. But it didn't scream. It laughed. You hide your guilt, it said. You survive while others die. Why do you get to lead? Raylan clenched his jaw. Because I don't run. The image vanished in a burst of light. The rings shifted again. A new figure appeared. A child. Human. Dirty. Crying. Help me, the child said. Raylan moved forward, but when he reached out, the child dissolved into black smoke. Then another figure rose. This time, it was a Kaldrak, wounded, trapped under rubble. It looked at Raylan with pain in its eyes. Even beasts feel, Virella whispered from outside the platform. Do you? Raylan stepped forward. He pushed the rubble away. The image faded again. The rings spun faster. Light flashed across the sky. The sound of Syraxis above grew louder. Then, silence. The rings froze. Raylan stood alone in the center. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Sweat ran down his back. His mind spun, trying to understand. And then the final test arrived. A roar, not from the sky, but from inside the temple. A real Kaldrak stepped into the circle. It was huge, scared, angry. "This one is real," Varela shouted. "This is your final challenge." Raylan didn't move. He had no weapon, no shield, just himself. The beast charged. Raylan didn't run. At the last second, he slid under its swing and grabbed a piece of fallen stone. He used it not to stab, but to bang against the ground. A pattern, a rhythm. Boom, 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 boom. The Kaldrak stopped. Its breath slowed. Its head tilted. Raylan repeated the beat. The beast stared at him. Then it lowered its head. Outside the platform, Syraxis let out a powerful screech. But this one didn't sound angry. It sounded proud. The rings around the platform shattered in a burst of light, rising into the sky like glowing birds. Raylan stood in the center, surrounded by silence. Virella stepped forward, slowly. Her face was blank with shock. "You passed," she said softly. "You're not their prey." Raylan looked up into the red sky. "I think I'm something else now," he said. Above, Syraxis flew away, and every Kaldrak on the planet howled in answer. The new Alpha. The air felt different now. As Raylan stepped off the trial platform, the red sand beneath him no longer shifted with fear, but with respect. In the distance, Kaldrak stood like silent statues on the cliffs, watching, waiting, not for blood, but for orders. Virella walked beside him, still stunned. "No one," she whispered, "in the history of this planet, has passed the trial without killing." Raylan didn't respond. He was still trying to understand it himself. The trial wasn't just about strength. It had been about control, about mercy, about something deeper. Now the beasts followed him, and that made him dangerous. Virella stopped walking and looked at him. "They'll come for you now." "Who?" Raylan asked. "Everyone," she replied. "The Varellan Council, the Human Federation, the Trade Lords. You just became something too powerful." Raylan sighed. "I didn't ask for this." "That doesn't matter. You are this now." A sharp metallic chirp sounded from her wrist. She tapped her communicator. "It's my scout team. They found us." Within minutes, a ship hovered overhead, sleek, black, and shaped like a dagger. Varella waved them down. The ship lowered and opened its ramp. 3 Virellan soldiers stepped out, armor shining, weapons ready. They looked at Raylan like he was a threat. "Is this the human?" one asked. Virella nodded. He passed the trial. Syraxis accepted him. The soldiers stared at each other, clearly disturbed. "That makes him a problem," the second soldier muttered. Raylan folded his arms. "I'm right here, you know." The first soldier raised a scanner. It beeped. His neural pattern has shifted. The Kaldraks marked him. He's part of their command net now. "What does that mean?" Raylan asked. "It means," Varella said carefully, "you're not just someone they follow. You're connected to them." Raylan looked back at the cliffs where the Kaldraks stood. One of them growled softly, almost like it heard everything. "This bond," he said, "can it be broken?" The soldier answered flatly, "Only if you die." Raylan smiled without humor. "Of course." Suddenly, another alert rang from the ship. A hologram appeared in the air, blurry, but urgent. A human admiral's face came into focus. "Captain Raylan Burke," the voice barked. "You are ordered to surrender yourself to the Federation. You are in possession of an unauthorized xenobond and are considered a threat to planetary stability." Raylan blinked. "Wait, what?" The admiral continued. "You are to be taken into custody immediately." Virella stepped in front of him. "That won't happen." The admiral sneered. "And you are?" "Virella, daughter of Councillor Dren." And I speak for the Virellan Wash. The Admiral paused. You support this thing? She looked at Raylan, then nodded. He did what no Virellan or human ever could. The Kaldrecs respect him. So will we. The hologram blinked off. Raylan shook his head. What did I just walk into? Virella gave a small smile. History. Before they could speak further, a deep rumble shook the ground again. The Kaldrecs howled, not in anger, but as a warning. Raylan looked up. Ships, dozens, falling from the sky. Federation and Virellan both. They're coming for you, Virella said. They'll try to control you, or kill you. Raylan clenched his fists. I didn't want this war. Doesn't matter, she said. It wants you. Raylan turned toward the cliffs. The Kaldrecs stepped forward, silent, ready, waiting for his word. He took a breath, then lifted his hand and pointed to the sky. The beasts roared behind him. And for the first time, the galaxy would see what a human alpha looked like. The beast commander. The sky burned with ships. Federation dropships pierced through Kaler 7's clouds like spears of fire. Virellan warcruisers followed, silent and sharp, forming a blockade above the red horizon. But down on the ground, Raylan didn't flinch. He stood tall on a rocky ledge, wind tearing through his hair, ice steady. Behind him, the Kaldrecs, dozens now, lined the cliffs. Their bodies shimmered under the blood-red sun, massive and terrible, yet still and obedient, waiting. He had no armor, no command rank, no throne, but he had earned them. Any chance they're here to talk? He asked, not turning around. Virella stood at his side. Humans don't talk when they're scared. And right now, everyone's scared. Raylan nodded. Good. He looked over his shoulder at the Kaldrecs. Let's give them something to fear and respect. Moments later, Federation troops landed. Hundreds of them, marching in straight lines, machines whirring beside them. Heavy weapons, drones, exosuits, the full force of a frightened empire. A general stepped forward, gray uniform, metal eye, voice like ice. Raylan Burke, he called out. You are bonded to an unclassified xeno-species. This is a threat to galactic peace. Surrender now. Raylan stepped down from the rock. No, he said calmly. The general blinked. Excuse me. Raylan kept walking toward him. I'm not your enemy. But if you try to control what you don't understand, you'll become one. You lead monsters. Raylan pointed back at the beasts. And you lead machines. What's the difference? The general raised a hand. Take him. Federation soldiers aimed their weapons. Then the ground shook. One Kaldrek leaped down from the cliffs, massive claws slamming into the earth, shaking it like thunder. It didn't attack. It stood between Raylan and the guns. Then another dropped down, and another, until a wall of living titans stood before the humans. The soldiers hesitated. Even their exosuits trembled. Raylan raised his hand. Stand down, he told the Kaldrecs. They obeyed, sitting like statues, not snarling, not moving. The general's eyes narrowed. You trained them? No, Raylan said. I earned them. Virella stepped beside him. He didn't conquer them. He connected with them. They follow him because they believe in him. The general's lips twisted. Beasts don't believe. Maybe, Raylan said, but they recognize truth better than you do. Behind them, more Virellan soldiers landed, but instead of pointing weapons, they dropped them. One by one, they knelt. Not to the Kaldrecs, to Raylan. Virella's voice was steady. I sent word. The Virellan Watch supports him. If the Federation tries to kill him, we will stand in his defense. A silence fell. The general stared at them all, jaw tight. Then he stepped back. This isn't over. Raylan nodded. No, it's just beginning. The general turned and left, taking his army with him. Raylan didn't smile. He just watched the ships rise again, disappearing into the sky. Then he turned to Varela. "I don't want to rule," he said quietly. "You're not ruling," she answered. "You're leading. There's a difference." He looked at the Kaldraks. They stared at him, not like monsters, but like something ancient waiting to heal. He walked among them, touched their scarred hides. They lowered their heads to him, one by one. A human among beasts, but no longer separate, no longer afraid. Raylan Burke was no longer just a soldier. He was something else now. The Beast Commander. Legacy of the Red Planet. The red winds of Keller 7 had changed. Once, they carried only dust and death. Now, they carried silence, calm, deep, and strange. Like the planet itself had taken a breath and was listening. Raylan stood at the highest ridge overlooking the plains where the Kaldraks gathered. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Their huge bodies rested across the land like ancient statues waiting for the stars to speak. But they were not at war. They were waiting for him. Varela stood a few steps behind. She held a small device in her hands. A message had just come in. Another one. "They're still asking for an answer," she said quietly. The Federation, the Varellan Council, even the Fringe Worlds. They all want to know, what will you do now? Raylan didn't speak. He was thinking. They all thought he wanted power. They were wrong. He turned slowly, looking at the sky where Syraxis had vanished days ago. The beast god had left without a word, but the mark it left behind still pulsed in Raylan's mind like a quiet song, a connection that never faded. "I didn't ask for this," Raylan finally said. "I came here as a soldier. I just wanted to survive." Varela stepped closer. "And now you can do more than survive. You can shape peace." Raylan looked down at the Kaldraks. "They don't want to fight anymore. I can feel it. They're tired." She nodded. "So are we." A soft hum broke the air. A small Federation drone hovered nearby, blinking blue. Raylan walked toward it and tapped the message. A new voice played. It was a child. Human. From one of the colony ships. "Mr. Raylan, my mom says you're the reason the monsters stopped coming near the cities. Are you going to make sure they don't come back?" Raylan's eyes softened. He played the message again, then looked at Varela. "That's the voice I want to answer." She gave him a small smile. "Then speak." Raylan stepped onto the ridge. His voice, carried by Kaldrak sound relays, echoed across the plains, across ships, across orbit. "People of the stars," he said, "I'm not a king. I'm not your enemy. I am not the master of monsters. I'm just a man who listened when no one else would." He looked out at the sea of beasts, resting with eyes half closed. These creatures, the Kaldraks, have been called weapons, monsters, killers. But they have memory. They have pain. They had no one to speak for them. He paused. Until now. The wind blew gently. The Kaldraks did not roar. They listened. "I'm not here to lead an army. I'm here to end one." From this day on, Keller 7 is no longer a battleground. It is sanctuary. The Kaldraks will not leave unless provoked. They will protect this land, and I will protect them. Varela watched, silent, proud. Raylan continued, "But if anyone comes here seeking war, understand this. I did not tame them with chains. I earned their respect. And if you force them to fight again..." He stepped down from the ridge. "They won't be alone." A deep, rumbling sound rolled through the valley. One Kaldrak let out a low howl, then another, and another. A song of unity, of warning, and of peace. Raylan stood in the center of them, arms crossed, calm and sure. The messages stopped coming after that. The Federation did not send more ships. The Varellan Council went silent. And slowly, Keller 7 became a story, a tale, a legend. of the human who faced the beast and made her smile disappear, not with violence, but with truth. Echoes of the beast. The years passed quietly on Keller 7. What was once a war-torn world had become something no one expected. A living peace. Raylan had not left. He lived in the high cliffs near the trial platform, now restored by both Kaldrak and Virellan hands, a place of learning, a place of healing. The Kaldraks still howled to the skies every dawn, not in anger, not in war, but in remembrance. They remembered the trial. They remembered the man who didn't break them, but saw them. And across the stars, his story traveled like fire on dry wind. Raylan Burke, the Beast Commander, the human who was chosen. But in quiet corners of the galaxy, not everyone saw his legend as hope. Some saw it as a threat, a dark moon far from Kaler. Inside a hidden lab, 3 figures stood over a glass tube. Inside it, something moved. Large, silent, cold. They'd followed a human, one voice said. The Kaldraks, the most feared predators in known space. And now, they sleep like pets at his feet. We must make sure they never follow another, said the second. The third spoke softly. We must break what made him special. A button was pressed. The thing in the tube opened its eyes. They glowed bright, unnatural, and empty. It wasn't a Kaldrak. It was something built, something designed to destroy what Raylan stood for. Back on Kaler 7, Raylan woke from a strange dream. He had seen fire. He had heard screaming Kaldraks. He had seen himself, but not himself. Darker, empty, silent. He walked outside, barefoot, onto the red sand. Virella stood nearby, sipping steam root tea from a carved stone cup. Her long hair was braided now. Her armor hung by her side, dusty and unused. You felt it too? She asked without looking up. He nodded. There's something coming, he said. She turned to face him. It's not just coming, she said. It's already here. A low rumble echoed across the cliffs. Not the kind that shook the ground, but the kind that vibrated inside your chest. The Kaldraks lifted their heads, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. Then, for the first time in years, they growled, not at each other, but toward the sky. Raylan looked up. The stars above Keller 7 were dimming. Something massive was approaching, something not of nature. Do you think they'll follow you again? Virella asked quietly. Raylan looked at the Kaldraks. They were older now, slower, but still loyal. No, he said. They'll walk beside me. He turned toward the trial platform. Because this time, he said, it's not just about survival. Virella raised an eyebrow. Then what is it about? Raylan's voice was calm, strong, and final. It's about protecting what we've built from what we used to be. And far away, hidden in a forgotten moon, the creature in the tube smiled, because it remembered Raylan too, and it was coming to test him one last time.